Hey, welcome everybody to today's webinar, Mastering Predictive Fieldcraft, Photographing Behavior Before It Happens. That sounds kind of counterintuitive, but really understanding what's about to happen and being able to predict what the animals are going to do before it happens is really a key skill. And believe me, when I talk about this stuff, it really, really, really does work. My wife tells me all the time I'm a creature of habit. She can predict my actions before I even do them. Well, the same thing applies to a lot of different wildlife species you're bound to encounter when you're in the field. If you start learning about these animals, then you can predict behavior and be ready for the shot before it even happens. As always, I'm Russell Graves. I'm coming to you live from Hackberry Farm, Dodge City, Texas. It's been a wonderful week this week. We had about an inch and a half of rain on Sunday, but every day since then it's been warm and not very much wind and pretty glorious out here. Everything's green and in its late, mid-spring best. So it's hard for me to concentrate when it's such a beautiful day out like today. I want to be outside, but alas, I'm going to be here with you guys for the next few hours. So stick with me. And again, if you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. If you've got any uh, if you want to ask the question, wait till the end, turn your mic on, ask the question. We'll go through all those. But anyway, I want this to be as much as we can, a monologue and not a dialogue. And I mean a dialogue and not a monologue. And so if you got anything, just feel free to ask. I'll be happy to answer the questions. If you hear me pause every now and then, there's still some people trickling in as I go along, like there's one that just popped up right now. So I might have to pause to let them in because I've got to admit every single person that comes into you go into the waiting room first, and I've got to let you in the webinar. So with that said, again, mastering fieldcraft, photographing behavior before it happens. I'm Russell A. Graves, and here we go. One of the things I really love about wildlife is the unpredictability of it. Last week, just this last week, a week ago, we were on the Redlands Ranch Wildlife Experience Workshop out in Northwest Texas and Southwest Oklahoma. That's where we did that. And one of the things that it's both for me as a workshop provider is both exciting and it's a little bit anxiety inducing is the fact that you never know what wildlife is going to do. You never really know if it's going to show up. You try to put the odds the best you can in your favor using these predictive methods like I'm going to talk about today, but you never really know. And I think that's the appeal to it because it truly is hunting with the camera, trying to go out and outsmart the animals where you can put yourself in a position to photograph them and then being smart enough to hang around and understand what they're going to do before they're going to do it. Anybody that has a pet in their home can vouch for what I'm going to talk about today. You can look at your pet without being able to communicate with it directly. You can't talk to the pet and it talk back to you. But like our little dog we call Max, when he stands by the door and you're not paying attention to him, he wants one thing. He wants outside. That's what I'm talking about. Learning those cues to be able to predict what's going to happen. And the thing about dogs is they all want outside. The way the cue is going to be a little different. But with a lot of these animals we're going to talk about today, they kind of do the same thing each and every time. So it's learning to understand those cues and as a photographer adapting to them. And that way you can predict behavior before it even happens. And so here's a few things of what you won't learn in this webinar. You won't learn every predictive behavior for every single animal. It's hard to know. I mean, the thing I'm going to talk about today deals mainly with the animals that I know and I'm around the most. But everyone's got that niche animal that they know and love. And so what I encourage everybody to do is learn as much as you can about the things you love photographing most. And then I'm not going to teach you how to master predictive behavior 100% of the time because a lot of times what we're doing is playing the odds. I'd mentioned Tim earlier last week on that workshop we were on. I would mention that pay attention. Now, I'll give you some specific examples in a little bit. I would say pay attention because what that animal's doing right now may lead to this behavior next. So if you pay attention and keep your camera on it, this may happen next. And you're playing the odds. It may happen, but then again, it may not. And so again, I'll give you some real concrete, specific examples of what I'm talking about here in a few minutes. But you can never master this predictive behavior 100% of the time. If I see my dog standing by the door, most likely he might have to go outside, but he may just be standing by the door. And so you try your best to just recognize the cues and react to them best you can, but just understand that what I'm going to talk about today isn't 100% accurate every single time. It just kind of gives you a guideline and guides you in the right direction. But what you will learn today is how body language predicts animal behavior. And it's a fairly reliable indicator. If you see them doing A, chances are they're going to do B after that. And I'll give you specific examples of how animal body language and the behavior that it leads to. Uh, we'll talk about how landscape affects animal movement. We talked about this a little bit last week, that I've heard it said about me, and I've heard it said about other people that, you must have some kind of sixth sense to be able to find animals the way you find them. It's really not a sixth sense. It's just an understanding of how landscapes affects animal movements and where to look most of the time. I'll give you a specific example of that here in a little bit too. And then I'll provide some specific case studies to kind of guide you through what I was thinking as it was happening, and then the results that followed in the end. And then kind of give you an advanced mindset on the process of nature photography. And what I mean by advanced mindset is just how to think about it sort of in a different way. One of the things that I hope these webinars, not just this one, but all the ones I do, because I feel like sometimes I don't think about these whole things like I don't think like the general population may think about some of these things. I'm not saying my way of thinking is superior, but I'm also not saying my way of thinking is inferior either. I just think it's a different way of thinking about a discipline that we all love doing. And I think the reason why I think differently about a lot of these things is, number one, I'm not formally trained. I don't have a degree in art. I've got a degree in agriculture. And so everything I learned on with, or I say everything I learned, a lot of the fundamentals of what I learned within about a square mile of where I sit right now. It's the place where it's the area where I grew up. It's where I first started taking pictures. It's where I learned a lot of this stuff. So a lot of it, I'm not going to say self-taught. I think that would be a little bit self-aggrandizing of me to say that. I don't think anybody's completely self-taught, because you don't learn in a vacuum. I had other people give me advice. I read books. I did all these things before the age of the internet to try to learn. And what the internet's done for me is help advance that. And so I say all that to say the advanced mindset is just a different way of thinking about some of these things that you may or may not hear other people parrot, but it's just my way of thinking of things. And then some really practical advice on how to get out in the field as soon as you can and succeed at all this. I mean, again, this stuff really does work. And so by utilizing predictive behavior techniques, shots like these are easy to acquire. I didn't take these pictures last week, but I just now thought about that workshop we were on last week. Everybody on that workshop was able to get similar shots to both of these just because able to predict the behavior and point your camera in the right direction when that behavior is about to occur. And so why pay attention to any of this stuff? I mean, why is this stuff really, really relevant? There's so much to learn in nature photography. There's the nuts and bolts of it: aperture, f-stop, ISO, composition, all those things you got to learn. Why would you even want to pay attention to the natural world and what you're trying to take pictures of? Well, I think for really a lot of reasons. Number one, by learning these skills, it helps the skill of anticipation. I've gone for 2 years now and shot pictures of manatees floating in the water like that. And they don't just float in the water like that all the time. It's that most time they either go to the top and get a sip of air, or they lay on the bottom asleep. Sometimes they'll float like this, but most of the time, whenever I've seen manatees, they've been on the bottom or floating on the top. Well, if you understand a little bit about animal behavior, and you can anticipate the action of what's about to happen, if they're laying on bottom, they're mammals, they can't hold their breath forever. So if you're snorkeling and you're waiting on one, they're going to go from the bottom and then just float real slow to the top, and then go to the top, float for a second, breathe some air, float back down to the bottom. So by anticipating, it's that in between you're able to capture, which is a lot more dynamic picture than them just laying on the bottom. Shooting pictures on the top is pretty cool, but that's a little harder. But that picture right there, it's really pretty easy to do if you can anticipate it. Not only anticipation, this other word, projection, is you can anticipate behavior that's going to happen immediately, but you can also project what behavior may happen in the future. The coyote, for example, when that coyote was running across the field towards me, I learned from experience a long time ago, this didn't happen immediately, but if I just say something, if I say his name, coyote, or hey, they'll stop and look at you. And so that animal's trotting across the field. I was taking a few pictures of it running, but I wanted to take a picture of it stop. So I just said, hey, it stopped and looked at me. I shot a few pictures, and he didn't run off. It didn't scare him. He just walked off after that. So I was able to project that behavior just because I've seen it so many times before. It also teaches you the value of patience. If you know anything about wildlife photography, if you're really advanced at it and you've been doing it for a while, or if you're pretty new to it, you know that patience is really the key thing. Because sometimes animals do what you want to do, sometimes they don't, sometimes they show up, sometimes they don't. It's always uh, a valuable attribute to have, just to be patient. And then for me, the most important skill it's going to teach you is just curiosity. You know, our smartphones we carry around are really ingenious for the point. By the way, this curiosity, if you're really curious, stay around. This is a plug for the next webinar. I want to talk about one of my products I'm about to release, the free product, by the way. It's going to help satiate this behavior of curiosity that we all have. But when you see an animal do something and you wonder, why is it doing that? Or why am I seeing it here? Or anything about that animal, it causes you to be curious. And once you're curious, then you want to learn more about the animal. And the more you know, the better you get at it, the more predictable all of this stuff becomes. And so I think with my point I was going to make earlier, with the smartphones we all carry in our pockets, the beautiful thing about curiosity is, for the most part, if we have a good signal, we can see something like a manatee and wonder, how long do they hold their breath for? Look it up on your phone. You find out they hold their breath for 2 to 3 minutes at a time before they float back up. So then you know, okay, as I'm anticipating this animal rising back to the top to get a breath of air, then I know I only have to wait 2 to 3 minutes for it to do that. So you don't have to wait that long. And so that's the thing about curiosity. Again, the more you learn, the more predictable your results become and the easier it makes it in the end. And so I think those are four important attributes about why learning any of this stuff we're talking about today matters. One of my favorite coyote shots I've ever taken. Of course, it's not the same one you saw earlier because this is not in the snow. It's actually on the ground. But understanding animal movement and really learning to read the signs and figuring out where animals were moving. I built a blind close to this spot, mainly for turkeys, but I knew if you've got a prey species there, predators are going to show up eventually. But I started seeing tracks out on this area. This is on my own property out in Northwest Texas when I lived out there, 50 yards behind my house. Sat in the blind one day, had turkeys come up, shot pictures of turkeys, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, here comes a coyote. One of my favorite shots. Love the pose, love the action, and love the light on this thing. It's just, to me, it's just a beautiful, beautiful shot. And so I'm going to break this down into some predictive into some specific animals that we're going to talk about predictive behavior about. And the first one are birds. And I'll start with the basics. Most everybody knows that's done this at any length of time. Right before birds fly, or if you don't know, here's a revelation for you. Right before, if birds are perched, right before they fly, they poop. Happens almost every time. You see a bird sitting on a limb or sitting on a fence post. If it poops, get ready because it's going to fly. More than likely. Again, not 100%, but 98% of the time it's going to fly. And so if you know that and you're ready for it, then you can get that critical action shot of it. Where you can not only get shots of it sitting on the fence post or sitting on a limb, you can also get those critical action shots of it when they do that first wing flap when they start to fly. Or you can do that next series of shots where they're in flight and they're flying along their path to where they're going next. And so that one little cue will keep you from getting surprised about when the bird's going to fly. And there's another thing. Birds almost always take off and land into the wind. And so when I do workshops like Bosque del Apache, one of the things I'm constantly trying to pay attention to is the direction of the wind because it's going to influence where we set up to be able to get pictures of the birds landing into us or taking off towards us as opposed to taking off away from us, and all you're getting are their backs. And so they take off and land into the wind. So pay attention to the wind. It's going to give you a cue to which way the birds are going to fly, at least initially. They'll always take off or land. They may take off into the wind, but as soon as they get airborne, they'll turn around and go somewhere else. It's just like airplanes. When you go to an airports, big commercial airports, and even small airports are always oriented for the prevailing winds because the big airplanes are more efficient if they take off into the wind or if they land into the wind. Birds are no different. And the waterfowl likes to land in holes. Let me explain that a little bit. If duck hunters learned a long time ago, if they're decoying ducks and they put out their decoy spread, they'll make like a hole in the middle of their decoys because ducks since they like being around other ducks, that's where they like to land. Now, you may not be going out and setting out decoys. Few people do that are photographing them. But if you're trying to pay attention to a piece of landscape, or if you're going somewhere like Bosque del Apache or some other place where there's a lot of snow geese, for example, look for the holes in the crowds. Wherever the holes are, that's where the other ones want to come fill in and land. They always like to land amongst each other, so they look for holes. Very seldom do you have a group of birds in one spot and you start seeing birds landing completely separated somewhere else. They're always going to want to land close to all their compadres. And so look for those holes, and that'll give some cues of where to set up. These are some of the behaviors we talked about last week on that Redlands Ranch workshop. Turkeys will gobble at any noise. We saw some tom turkeys strutting around, and I told everybody to be ready. I'll make them gobble for you. You can say turkey at them, they'll gobble, especially this time of year when they're really jacked up on testosterone during the breeding season. You can make a turkey sound at them, they'll gobble. You can whistle at them, they'll gobble. You can close a car door, they'll gobble. They'll gobble at any noise. And so if you know that, and just be ready for them, anytime a crow calls or anytime an owl hoots around them, they'll gobble back at it. So be ready for that, and you can take pictures just like this. When I took this picture, I was in a blind. The turkey didn't know I was there, but I'd just say his name, Turkey, and the turkey would gobble back at me. And I was able to take pictures like that so easy. Another thing in particular, I'll tell you about in a second. Many birds, like bee eaters, they like to take off and land on the same perch. Scissor-tailed flycatchers do a similar thing. If they're landing on a perch and they're hunting, a lot of times they'll fly off that perch, fly around, and then go land back on the same perch. If you know that, you can if you play to take advantage of that, and the fact that I've already told you that they often poop before they take off, and they take off and land into the wind. If you can put all those three things together, you can get some dynamic shots of birds taking off or landing, because they always go back to the same perch. And then this is another particular behavior. We were at Redlands Ranch sitting in the blind. By the way, if you don't know about this place, I've got a property out in West Texas that we've got a water hole and we've got a blind that sits when you're in the blind, you're standing up, you're shooting off a shelf, so you've got a solid rest, but you're at eye level with the birds that are coming in to feed and water at the water hole. And so last week we had a turkey come in, and so she was walking around and feeding and drinking a little bit, and then she got ready to leave, so she preened herself a little bit, and I told everybody in the blind, get ready, because she's about to do a wing flap. And sure enough, as soon as she got done preening, she stretched her wings out and flapped them and kind of straightened her feathers back out. And even though turkeys are beautiful, if they're just standing there, if you can get dynamic shots like that, it's always better. And that's predictive behavior that called it a couple of times last week, both on the gobbling and on the wing flap and the preening. It's just something to always pay attention of. Ducks do that same behavior. A lot of perching birds will do a similar behavior. They may not wing flap, but they'll ruffle their feathers. Owls do it. I've seen owls do it before. They'll preen their feathers and they'll ruffle their feathers quite a bit, just trying to straighten them out. They may not do a wing flap this big, but they'll still do something that's just beyond the normal bird sitting in a tree or sitting on a fence post. Now, let me make this clear. I've got nothing against the proverbial birds on a stick picture that people try to malign all the time. I think any good picture of an animal is a gift, no matter what it's doing or where it's setting. And so I'm not discouraging the birds on the stick photo. I think it's a valuable photo you can take, and I take it every single time I can. But pay attention to these cues, and you can also often be rewarded with additional behavior as well. A couple more behaviors with birds. Wading birds, like sandhill cranes, are notorious about this. You can watch sandhill cranes, and when they start to lean like that, they're about to take off, and they always lean into the wind, and they always will telegraph their intentions well before they even do it. Not all of them do it, but a lot of them will. They'll lean like that for a while, and they'll start kind of walking forward a little bit. And if you see a bird doing that, just be ready, because they're about to take off. I've seen other wading birds do it as well. From the smallest ones, they'll be still for a while and they'll kind of lean, and then all of a sudden they'll take off. And so watch for that behavior, and it works every single time. And perching birds, like this western meadowlark, they'll adjust their wings or flick their tail right before they take off. After they poop, they'll do this and then take off. So watch for that as well. We saw a bird do that last week. Dick Sissel landed on the fence right beside us. We were taking pictures of bison. It called for a little bit, it pooped, it adjusted its feathers, and it took off and flew a few feet away. But it did those same exact behaviors. They're creatures of habits. waiting, if you get a chance to take pictures of wading birds like this great egret while they're feeding, one of the things they do a lot of times is right before they lunge, they'll get real still and stare at the water. Looks like they're being hypnotized by the water, but what they're watching is whatever they're going to try to catch. They're waiting for a minute to pounce. So if you can see them leaned over, staring at the water like that, be ready because and have your finger on the trigger. And one of the new technologies that cameras have that make this shots like this really achievable and another valid reason to pay attention is that the pre-shot capture that they have. I know Nikon, Sony, Canon all have it. The ability to half press the button and go ahead and start recording pictures in the buffer before you even take the first picture. It allows you to get that split second of time right before the action. If you're a little late reacting to the action, you're able to catch those pivotal moments just by being ready and by paying attention to these behaviors. And there's a roadrunner that caught a lizard that's about as long as it is. And so ungulates, a few predictive behaviors. If you don't know what ungulates are like deer, bison, hooved animal, most of the time a ruminant. They're all the animals that we really pay attention to in the fall when they get hard antlers and during the rut. And so ungulates include deer species like elk, white-tailed deer, moose, mule deer, bison, pronghorns, bighorn sheep. That's just to name a few. There's a few more ungulates uh, in the United States, but most of the overt ungulate behavior revolves around the breeding season or the rut, as it's called. And that's where you see them. I'm going to back up one. That's where you see them when they've got they'll be in the hard antler during rut. They've got the big, thick necks. They're being a little more aggressive and a little more animated than what they are most of the time of the year. If I see bucks on my place this time of the year, they've got short, stubby, velvet covered antlers. They're just hanging around with other bucks. They're really not doing anything exciting. But if you wait till the rut, then you start getting behaviors like this where they're chasing and they're really animated and as they're in search of females to mate with, or they're in search of other males to try to run off that they perceive as rivals. This particular deer right here, I'd seen it a few days before when I was scouting and hoped to see it again closer. This was in Great Smoky Mountain National Park in Cades Cove, and we're driving around and we see that buck, and it's just that's a special deer. Though that's a unicorn of a deer. It's got the unusual tines it has along its main beam, and then the just the size of it, its mass, its width, and then the fact that it's got that big drop tine or that tine on the right hand side that goes straight down. That's an unusual feature you don't see all the time. Luckily for us, it was during the rut, and we happened to be on the road between it and some does that were across the road that it was watching. And then after a few seconds of watching those does, he couldn't stand it any longer. He had to be with them. So he ran towards the does, and we were able to get this picture of him in just a special moment, special picture of a special buck. A picture of this deer would have been good if it had just been standing in the field, but get a little bit of action like that. To me, it just really enhances the look and the storytelling ability of that photo. Bison, again, last week we were a little bit off because you can't always predict it, but bison in Southwest Oklahoma are starting to kind of show a little bit of ruddy behavior. We saw a standoff between two bulls last week. It was like dueling banjos. One would paw the ground and kick up dust and bellow at the other one, and the other one would do the same. And they kept staring at each other and they had a face off, but they never wanted to fight. But if you're going to catch bison in the rut and fighting, late, depending on where you're at and how far north or south you are, usually the rut on all ungulate species starts in the south and it moves. I'm sorry. I said that wrong. Ungulate with deer species, the rut starts in the north and moves to the south. A lot of times with bison, because they have their calves earlier, the ruts will start earlier for bison, like in May, sometime in May and into June and a little bit of July. You go somewhere like Yellowstone, the rut's like in July and into August. And so because of that, if you know when the rut's coming, you might get treated to two of them fighting. And it's just a spectacular scene to not only see them fighting, but also hear them and the sounds they make when their heads butt together. It's pretty crazy. And then some species, particularly deer, when they're curious about you, they'll look at you and you can see the behavior on the lower right. They'll lower their head and kind of shake their head at you a little bit. Just gives you a little different body pose if you pay attention to that, if they're curious about you. Or does do this behavior a lot. They'll look at you and then stomp their feet if they're curious about what you are. And then what they're trying to do, I ascertain what they're trying to do is get a reaction out of you and get you to move to try to spook you from your location. Because a lot of times when deer, they can see good, but they can't see great. I think I've read different reports, but I think overall our vision is better than deer's vision. Uh, but we've also got the capacity to think more critically about what we're seeing. But deer, when we're afield, we'll wear, drab colored shirts and everything else. And so you kind of blend in. And when you blend in, if they're not sure what you are, they'll make this behavior right here. But it's always, if they've turned and face you like that with their ears erect, get ready. It may not be a crazy behavior, but just that head lowering behavior is just a different pose than what you get with them standing, like that buck standing straight up. Just a little bit different look. And I'm always looking for stuff like that. In fact, no, I was going to say that may be the same buck, but it's not the same buck. And then also during the rut, if you see a male standing in close proximity to a female during that time, he'll almost always do a lip curl. If you watch him long enough, that's a mule deer in the upper left and the whitetail in the lower right. It's the same response. You'll see bison do it, especially if they sniff of a female's rear end, and if they're close to the rut, they'll do that same response. Again, a little different behavior that's engaging, and it's something worth catching. And the reason why they do that, they've got the ability to catch air in their nostrils, and when they do it, they'll close up the back of their cleft and they'll close up their nostrils and trap that air inside their muzzle. And then they can chemically determine by the air they've captured inside their muzzle how close that female is, if she's ready to breed, if she's getting close to being ready to breed, or if she's already bred and is past. So they can ascertain all that by doing that lip curl and doing that Fleming response. And so if you know they're going to do that, and you catch yourself during the rut, bison rut, elk rut, whatever rut it is, if it's an ungulate, if the male is standing close to the female, and if he'll a lot of times he'll do this spontaneously if she walks by him, but if he goes and overtly sniffs her, get ready because they're going to do that. Now, when I shot the picture of both of these, that's exactly what had just happened. What you can't see off the left-hand side of the screen or off the left-hand side of the frame on both these animals is the doe that was standing there. But both of them would sniff at the doe, and then when they raise their head, they'll oftentimes tilt their head, or they'll tilt their head back like that, and then turn their head in kind of a dramatic fashion, and it always makes for a good picture. I I always take advantage of that shot whenever I can get a chance to take it. And then elk, if you ever go places like Rocky Mountain National Park or Yellowstone National Park in the fall, they do all kinds of predictive behavior. And it's all predicated on the rut. The bugling and the chasing each other and the Fleming response, all of it is just based on around the rut. They're trying to establish their dominance because unlike whitetail or mule deer, those species of deer are trying to breed everyone they can because they're just trying to breed individuals wherever they can find them. Elk, on the other hand, they try to gather up a harem of cows. And so during the rut, what makes the elk rut particularly dramatic is they'll gather up that harem into open areas. And those open areas is where they try to keep their harem of cows in the open areas. So that way they can see other males trying to come and steal their cows from them. And so if you're paying attention to elk during the rut, there's that constant action of the bulls always trying to keep their cows from wandering off. Cows want to go back and do what they want to do, but the elk want them to stay together in a small herd in that harem. And so you get all that drama of the bulls chasing the cows, or the bulls breeding the cows, or the bulls constantly bugling, trying to tell the cows, I'm here, or trying to warn the other bulls, don't come over here because there's a bull here and he has a harem of cows. And so you're constantly seeing them bugle. That bugling shot is one of the most beautiful shots you can make, but it's so easy to make if you happen to time it at the right time. If another bull shows up and they're willing to do it, animals fight as a last resort, but they do fight. You don't see fights all the time, but a lot of times you see sparring matches where they're just kind of tinkling their antlers together. But on the real knockdown, drag out fights, they're really after it and they're trying to assert their dominance over other males, and it makes for some dramatic pictures. But that happens during the rut. Sometimes pre-rut behavior, you'll see a couple of young males sort of pushing and shoving on each other. That's just like you'd see if you go by any kind of playground, young boys doing that. They're just trying to test their skills and test their dominance and do it for fun. That's what these two are doing here. Their eyes are wide open, so they're not real serious about what they're doing. They're just in a shoving match, playing with each other. But on the real aggressive fights, and I thought I included one in here, you'll know it when you see it, because a lot of times it involves this behavior right here that we're talking about. If you see two bucks near each other and they lower their ears and start walking stiffly, get ready for a fight. And you can see this buck on the right on both those pictures. That's what he's doing. There's another buck that you can't see off camera because they were separated and I couldn't get them both in the frame. But that buck saw another buck. You saw he's walking stiffly. It's hard to show in a picture, but you can see by his body language. He's got his legs and his body's real rigid. He's lowered his ears. They're not as erect and pointing forward. And then you can also see, like your dog does when he gets alarmed about something, you can also see the hair standing up on his back. He's ready for a fight. And so as soon as they get together, if both of them are willing, then you get these big knockdown, drag out fights. The fights don't last long, maybe 30 seconds. There will be a shoving match. They'll bang antlers a few times, but usually one will give up before the other and run off. But if you're ready for it and you see that behavior about to begin, pay attention because if they're in a good spot, you can capture it, then you're going to capture some dynamic images as a couple of big ungulates get ready for a fight. And then if you see some ungulates, and this is during the rut, stop by a tree or sagebrush or anything like that, get ready. They're about to make a scrape. Pronghorns do it around sagebrush a lot. Deer do it around trees. But what a scrape is, it's like a scent marker that they make during the rut because they want the females that are ready to breed. If they know a buck is hanging around, they want that female to hang around there. And the way they establish their location is pronghorns will paw a bare spot on the ground and they'll rub their antlers on sagebrush and they'll urinate into the bare spot. Elk will do the same thing. They'll make scrapes on the ground. Deer, white-tailed deer, and mule deer a lot of times. Mule deer make them on the ground a lot, but they'll also make them in trees. But white-tailed deer, if you see them stop by a tree like that and they stand there for a second and start pawing, they're making a scrape. So what white-tailed deer will do is they'll paw the ground, urinate in it, and then there's always with white-tailed deer a branch above where they pawed, and that's called a licking branch, and they'll reach up and lick on that branch to leave their scent on the branch as well. In open country like the one on the lower right, where there's no overhanging trees, you can see that guy just used the end of I think that was a yucca plant he used as his licking branch. And you can see him there. He's actually got the branch in his mouth. That's right after he finished pawing the ground. Again, just a different behavior to get a different dynamic of the animals, and that's what we're looking at on predictive behaviors. Now, predators, good luck with them. They're a little harder to predict in my estimation. You can predict them. There are a few cues you can go by, but they're harder to predict because of all the animals I've seen, they're just harder to see. I know for a fact that bobcats live all around my property. I just never see them. They're here. I see their tracks and I see their scat, but I just never see them because they're the master at hiding. I've told people this a lot. If you live in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, you'll see bobcats quite often down there. That's the highest concentration of bobcats per acre of any place in Texas. Bobcats are everywhere, but they're so good at hiding, you just never know they're around. Mountain lions live in our midst here. Mountain lions are the same way. They're all around us, but they hide so well, you just never see them, but they're here. And so since I see predators less, they're a little hard to make predictive behaviors, study predictive behaviors, but there are some. And some of these I'll put together when I do the case studies here in a minute. It's one of my favorite pictures I've ever taken. That was based on a guess. Coyote came running across the field. I guessed to myself, if I shot this at 1/15th of a second and I did a slow shutter speed, do I think I could capture this behavior? I mean, do I think I could capture it running and capture that motion blur and more importantly, get the eye in focus? And it was a complete guess. And sometimes you get lucky, and I got lucky on that one. This is one of my favorite coyote pictures too. But one thing one thing it's good to know is that they typically hunt into the wind. If you're going somewhere like Yellowstone where coyotes and foxes are used to seeing people and you can be fairly close to them and they're not going to disturb what they're doing or their hunt. If you pay attention to the wind, a lot of times you can know which direction they're going to go because they hunt into the wind. And the reason why is they're trying to capture the scent of any kind of prey that they're looking for. So that scent will be blowing towards them. Now, if they hunted with their back to the wind, their scent would be blowing towards the prey animals, and the prey animals would know they're coming before they got there. And so this is a lot of common sense. They hunt into the wind mostly. Not all the time. This isn't universal, but it's a good rule of thumb. If you can predict the wind, you can see that coyote there, that fox there, and its hair blown back. It's hunting right into the wind because that's what they do. And that coyote there running at me, that was the one that was running earlier. I saw it from running across the field, and it was running straight towards me, but it was running into the wind. and I knew it didn't smell me and I was camouflaged pretty well. That's the one I said hey to and it made it stop. Hey, I just want to note that the few that have came in late, we've already started on the first webinar. All these webinars start at 12 noon Central when I have them Central Time. So if you came in late, don't worry, I'm recording it. I'll send out the recording later. If you're here early for the next one, as soon as this one's over, we'll start the next one. So just know that. If you see a fox or a coyote stop and cock their head, get ready for a pounce. That's almost universal too. They'll almost always, if they stop and cock their head and they're looking at the ground, they hear something and they're ready to pounce. I saw this behavior uh, just the other day too. Same behavior. That's what they're doing. They're hunting into the wind. They stopped, cocked their head, pounced on something, and ate something. And then other animals, a few more predictive behaviors. If you're ever up in Alaska photographing bears, be ready. If they stand and looking around, they're curious about something, and a lot of times they'll sniff the wind. They've got an incredible sense of smell, and so they'll put their nose up and sniff around just to see what they're curious about. This particular bear, well, these were two different bears here, but this particular bear was curious about us because we're standing there in a group, and bear came cruising by in the water and saw us and stood up for a second to see what we were doing. And then another bear came by later, stood up too, did the same thing, sniffed the air just to try to check out what we were. Realized we weren't any kind of threat to them. They went about their business. Prairie dogs, and prairie dogs aren't something you see all the time, but if you go out west, it's chances are if you visit some of the big national parks like the Badlands, or if you're on Redlands Ranch Wildlife Excursion, we see prairie dogs. When they first climb out of the holes, one of the first things they'll do is kiss each other. And that's a kin recognition. That's another behavior we saw last week. And I told everybody, get ready, this is going to happen. That's a kin recognition they do where they'll kiss each other, they touch each other's mouths, and they can know by the scent of if it's a kinfolk that live around them because prairie dogs live in real tight family knit groups called coteries. And and even though they live in big colonies together, one neighborhood of prairie dogs may not get along with another neighborhood of prairie dogs because they're still fighting over territory. And so it just allows them, especially when they're young, to learn who each of the family members are. And so they always kiss. So sometimes they do it out of necessity. I've watched them enough. I think a lot of times they do it just out of habit and they just enjoy kissing each other. So that's what they do. And then prairie dogs, if you move around them, it's another behavior we saw last week. They'll chirp, they'll make a noise because they're trying to warn everybody else, hey, there's something I haven't seen here before, and they're watching out for potential danger and they're trying to warn everybody else there's potential danger. But get pictures of them chirking. If you sit around long enough, they'll finally realize, okay, he's not much harm. I'm just going to calm down and do something else after that. Then they'll start foraging or they'll start kissing and all that. But if you know behavior one, like chirking, is going to lead to behavior two, a more relaxed posture where they start kissing or rolling around or playing or foraging, then you're ready for all that when it comes. You're not just kind of going around playing whack-a-mole with prairie dogs, just trying to get one behavior or another behavior. You can kind of predict what's coming over time and be able to respond to it photographically speaking. I'll tell you this story. This is when we do our Everglades trip, there's a place we take a boat trip out into called 10,000 Island, area of the Everglades. And they've got a lot of these Everglades raccoons. Some scientists think these may be a subspecies all their own. They're a smaller raccoon. They're more kind of a rusty color than the raccoons you may be accustomed to seeing in your neighborhood. But they only eat and drink, or they only drink when it rains, and they only eat when the tide goes out. Because when the tide goes out, they'll get along the shore and they'll forage for shrimp or oysters or crabs or whatever else they can find along the shoreline. So if you time it right, we can almost always see these things when we go to Florida on that trip because if we go when the tide's out, we'll find them along those islands and they have no fear of people. In fact, that's why I bring up this one. This one right here saw us in the boat and it really acted like it was his only chance to get off the island because it swam out to the boat and or swam out to a log like that, stood there and stared at us for a while. And then as we got closer and we're taking pictures, this was shot with a 200 millimeter lens, by the way. I was really close to this thing. And as we got closer, it tried to swim out to the boat and wanted to get in with us, but it finally realized it couldn't and turned around and went back. But really cute animals. Uh, Unlike the raccoons we see, they're active all day long, on the not just in the evening. So it's a neat species to photograph. And then a word about the land. I teased that early on when we were talking about predictive behavior in animals and how the landscape makes a big difference. I'd said earlier, a lot of times people think you're a genius because you can spot animals. Like last week, I was jokingly telling everybody I'm the world's best mountain boomer spotter. A mountain boomer is a collared lizard that they live all over the West, but they're really striking. They've got yellow throats and heads, and really the males have really bright blue bodies, and they're a big lizard. They're, maybe the body 6 to 8 inches long. And they occupy a specific niche. And where we were last week, if you go to the right spot, you're going to find collared lizards. And so they use the land in a real specific way. A lot of the wildlife species we photograph use land in a real specific way. They're going to use it, and they're going to use the same thing each and every time. So what I do when I'm looking for animals, depends on the animal I'm looking for. Prairie dogs are a good example. If I'm looking for prairie dogs, I'm looking for open prairie. That's a no-brainer on that one. If I'm looking for mountain boomers, those collared lizards, I'm looking for open rocks that are open to the sun because they like to get on top of rocks and sun themselves. If I'm looking for deer or elk, I'm looking in the draws. And so I'm looking in different, it's not just a random find. Most of the times you find these animals in repeatable spots over and over again. And and so it helps to understand the interconnectedness between the landscape and its inhabitants or the animals you're trying to photograph. Because again, every animal will use the landscape in a different way. A lot of them use it all generally the same way. I'll show you an example in a minute. But a lot of times, pikas, for example, you go to Yellowstone National Park, the pikas live in particular habitats. But if you find that habitat, you can almost always find pika there if it's the right time of the year. And so if you just understand the interconnectedness of landscapes and its inhabitants, it goes a long way towards your scouting and trying to find animals when you're in the field. And then rephrase it here. Each species had its own bedding, feeding, and loafer requirements, and they need interconnected patches of landscape to help them travel to where they're going to eat, sleep, and rest. In a nutshell, all animals have the same, including you and I, have the same 5 habitat requirements: food, water, cover, or a place that they get out of the elements, like our house. Food, water, cover, space. You got to have a certain amount of space to thrive in, and arrangement. How all of those are arranged together. So if we know that we need food, water, and cover and the space to live in, what makes arrangement is important, and this is where retailers know this about the human existence. Most of y'all who live in a city or suburb probably don't have to drive very far at all to go to a grocery store to get your food. To get your water, you go turn on the tap and it's there. And so the people who have helped us create modern society have helped solve the arrangement problem. Well, animals figure it out on their own. They're just going to gravitate where the arrangement of food, water, cover, and the amount of space they need is all kind of inherently there. One of the things I do not only on Redlands Ranch, but also Hackberry Farm is I'll manipulate the habitat to try to improve all those elements of what animals need to try to improve the amount of wildlife diversity and the number of wildlife that are on these places. And then in general, what all that means is wildlife likes to travel along habitat edges, draws, and other seams that you find in the landscape. And here's what I mean by that. Here's an aerial view of part of Hackberry Farm right here. And so all the patchwork stuff at the top of the picture you see, that's the wetland. It's in a dry period there. It's only a wetland when we get the right rains at the right time, or when I can supplement it with water from the creek that runs by it. I'll pump water into it. This particular year, this was, I think, late in the season when I shot this picture. So it's always dry at the end of summer. But you can see I'll go in there and take my tractor and a shredder, and I'll mow the place with little islands of brush. And I do that for the songbirds and for the small mammals because they like those little islands of cover. They also like the areas they can roam out into and find food. So you can see all the patchwork at the top of the picture. Towards the very north part of that patchwork, on the north side of that patchwork, that's the open water area. It all floods with water when it's full, but as the water recedes, it goes north. And so the last vestiges of water are in the north part of that, and it opens up more ground. Now, you can see to the south of that, what you can't see is my house sits to the south of the open field that's south of the wetlands. But I can tell you, because I'm looking out across this pasture right now towards that wetland, I can tell you that, yeah, there's the wetland there. I can tell you that most all the animals that I see crossing, not all of them, but most of them, if I had to put a bet on it, most animals I see crossing this place, they travel along that corridor right there at the edge. At the edge of, they go from the edge of where the open ground meets a creek, and then they travel along the edge, and then they travel over to the next creek on the place, which is to the right. And the reason why they do that is most animals that I see are all prey species. Something else is going to try to eat them. And so it gives them the ability to be close to food, close to cover. They're always close to water because there's water in the creeks or water in the wetland, or I've got ponds on the place. They're always close to water. Allows them to be covered of, close to food, water, cover, or food, water. They've got the arrangement and the space to work for them, but the cover part, if something decides to get after them, it's not far from them to run to be able to hide. Whether we're talking turkeys or deer or or turtles or whatever else, they never have to go very far to find a place to hide from something that's going to try to eat them. And so when I'm afield, the one thing I look for, I look for seams. If I'm trying to predict where an animal is and where it's going to go, I look for a seam, a little low point in the landscape where I think they'll traverse. Because a lot of wildlife species, not saying they never do, I've seen them do it before. A lot of them don't like to go over hills. They prefer to kind of stick to the bottom and stick to those seams. And then weather's also a big factor. And so that's also to be aware of too. Animals tend to weather and daylight influences a lot of things they do, including when the animals feed, when they migrate. We all know that we get shortening days in the fall and lengthening days in the spring, which triggers the great migrations on both seasons. Uh, and then it's going to trigger when they go. For you guys that are coming in late, we've been going at this one for about 50 minutes now. I've got it recorded, so if you missed this one and if this is what you're here for, then be aware of that. If you're here for the next one, we hadn't quite started that one yet, but stay tuned for that one as well. And it also influences when animals breed. The cooler weather, but really the shortening daylight instigates the rut for the ungulates that we talked about earlier. And then when they may congregate, when or where they may congregate. This year, when we were in the Everglades, they were in the midst of a drought. And so there wasn't as much water. One of the reasons why I do that Everglades trip in February is because it's a dry season anyway. And as their water holes shrink, the animals start occupying a smaller and smaller area because they're going to go to water. Same concept I use for Redlands Ranch. It's a semi-arid part of the country, and I knew if I put a water hole out there, water is an essential thing animals need. They're always going to go there, and they're always going to drink. So you can sit in the blind out there, for example, and see an unending wave of animals. There's always something there coming in to eat or drink because we provide food sources there for them too, but it's always some water. And so the weather helps influence, on a big scale where they're going to be. You go to Yellowstone in the fall, right before winter hits, most likely the elk are going to move out of the valley. They're going to move to lower elevations where it's easier to feed. The pronghorns are going to do the same way. Go in the spring, it all goes in reverse. Same way with bison. The bison are moving up into the valleys, the higher elevation valleys in Yellowstone in the spring, and they do it in reverse in the fall. So weather and daylight length influences all that. And it's always good to know to understand what kind of behavior you can expect at various times of the year. And so let's talk about uh, a few case studies to kind of put a bow on all this stuff we're going to talk about. We're getting to the end of this pretty quick. So last February, when I was in Yellowstone with a group, we saw a couple of coyotes during their breeding season. So when you see coyotes that time of year, you almost always see them in pairs. And there was a couple of coyotes hunting in uh, Hayden Valley. One was close to the road, one was far off, but the one far off from the road turned and started coming up towards where we were at. And I told everybody, because it was hunting into the wind, I told everybody, let's just see what this coyote is going to do. And sure enough, it got closer and closer to us. And so we're sitting there watching it. And as it's walking, we're all taking pictures of it. And then oops, went the wrong way. And then I see this behavior. Stops, cocks his head, and is staring at the ground. And I told everybody, get ready, because I think we're about to see a pounce. And sure enough, those words weren't 2 seconds out of my mouth. And then there it goes. And so what's satisfying about this for me is being able to predict the behavior. But what's really satisfying about it is everybody in the group got the same shots. And it's just a remarkable scene of this coyote being able to pounce on on a bowl or something that it caught in the snow, caught it a meal just right after that. And we were all there to witness it. But more importantly, we all had the wherewithal to know because you saw this behavior, you knew what was about to happen. And so everybody had their camera turned on, it was ready. One of the guests on the trip put together a composite of all the phases of that jump. I thought it was pretty cool. They just had, I think you've seen pictures like that before. 10 or 12 pictures of the coyote stopped with his head cocked all the way through the leap. And then when it caught something, really neat shot. And we were just, we were the appropriate distance away from it, but we were just right there by it when it happened, and we're blessed to see it. There's the tech specs if you like that kind of stuff. I shot that with a Canon R5 Mark II, Canon 500 millimeter lens, the old version that weighs about a ton with a 1.4 teleconverter. Right there is my 1/2000th of a second at f5.6, ISO 320. This comes from experience. If you shoot on snow, you almost always have to overexpose. So the snow looks white and it doesn't look gray and muddy. So it's one stop overexposed on that picture. And then case study number two, the Texas bear. Last summer, I was out scouting in Big Bend National Park because I had a trip go out there this past December and just going out there because it'd been a while since I'd been. I want to reacquaint myself with the park. We're driving around. And my wife says, we're driving around on the road and my wife says, there's a bear. And I look and sure enough, there's a bear and it's walking near the road, kind of parallel towards us, but I'm trying to figure out, you can't stop on the road. So I'm trying to figure out where can we get to a turn off and where do I think this bear is going to walk? And what I did what I said earlier. I think my prediction is that it's going to walk along a seam. And sure enough, that bear walked kind of across a little small hill, not didn't expose itself a lot on top of the hill, but then started walking up that draw. And you can see the landscape in front of it there. It just followed that little seam of landscape all the way till it got out to the road and it crossed the road and ran on. And we didn't keep trying to pursue it because it was the summertime when we were trying to give the bear its space. But for a couple of minutes there, it was feeding right alongside of us as we were sitting there parked and everyone's shooting out the window of the vehicle. It was just a remarkable time. And it was a really good opportunity. Yeah, you can really see there kind of the seam it was walking in. And then there's the tech specs there. R5, 500 millimeter lens, 1/400th of a second at f5.6 ISO 500 is what I shot on that. And then fighting turkeys. I haven't seen this behavior a lot, but the time I saw it, I knew what was about to happen. And it's another thing you can predict. If you're like me and you like turkeys, I went on a private ranch. The guy said, I got a lot of turkeys that roost by my house. You should come try to photograph them. Uh, and so I set a blind up near his house and was photographing these turkeys like this. One of my favorite turkey pictures of all time. Photographing the turkeys like this as it was strutting around, and pretty soon these guys show up. And I'm gonna show you the difference. If you look at that turkey, he's got a real well-developed beard. He's an older tom turkey, maybe 3 or 4 years old. If you look at these guys, they've got little stubby beards. That tells me one thing. They were born a year ago. They're called jakes, is what they're called. And all they are like teenage turkeys. And jakes aren't very brave by themselves, but they'll gather up in small gangs of jakes, and then they get brave and they try to pick on the dominant males of an area. And so when I saw these guys show up and then the Tom paid attention to it, I knew I might be about to see a fight. Didn't know for sure, but I was ready in case it was going to happen. I got everything set up for that. And then sure enough, a couple of minutes later, they spar for just just 15 seconds. And then the Tom runs off and the Jakes hang around the rest of the day. But this is the whole band of Jakes that showed up. And then the Tom I photographed first, he's there on the left. You can see his longer beard, but the rest of them all have these little stubby beards. But I always thought it was funny how they're standing around in their body language of watching this fight go on. But they fought for a short minute. I was able there to get the picture. And you can see this little strip of light on the grass right there that you see right at the base of the turkey's feet. I mean, it was just right there. It was a little bit further away than that, but it's just still the same area. I mean, those two pictures weren't taken 20 yards apart, but it's but because I saw those jakes show up, I knew what was going to happen. I was ready for it. This shot was taken a while ago. Canon 1D Mark III camera, 500 millimeter lens, 1/400th of a second at f4, ISO 250 is what I shot that at. And then case study number 4, the singing quail. This happened a year ago at Redlands Ranch. Quail are always coming in. They're beautiful birds. I told someone last week, And I said it in my field report, if you haven't read that one yet, that I don't think any other bird puts basic colors of black, brown, and white together so beautifully like the bobwhite quail does. To me, they're just a special bird, and I love photographing. But in the springtime, if you understand their behavior, uh, when they show up, that if they take a perch somewhere, it's likely they're going to do one thing. So these quail came in, and then he crawled up on a log that I keep right by the water hole. And I knew, and I told everybody, get ready. He's about to do one thing, and that one thing is he's going to sing and try to get a mate. And that's what he did while he was there. By the way, before I go on, I'm almost done with this presentation, but if you're here to see webinar number 2, bear with me. We're probably going to start that within about the next 10 minutes. So I don't like too much longer. This one's running a little bit long, but if you're here to see the second webinar, just stick with me and I'll be ready to go on that. And then case study number 5, the dolphin. This is if you watch many of my webinars, I show this dolphin picture a lot because I jokingly refer to it as the world's greatest dolphin photo. And I say that bragging to another guy that was on a trip with me before, because he told me I'd never be able to take a pictures of a dolphin's eye. And when I did, I was able to download that picture from the boat and send to him all the way in Houston, Texas, saying, I did it. It's the world's greatest dolphin photo because I got what you said I couldn't get. And so, but I was riding at the back of the boat. We were heading in for the evening, and I heard a splash behind me. And if you've ever been around dolphins, and I looked back and that's what I saw in the water, if you could see it, just a fin sticking out. If you've ever been around dolphins before, and I'm no dolphin expert, but I know one thing, they like jumping in the wake of boats. I've seen that plenty of times. And when they did that, I just knew, get ready because he's going to jump again. They just love doing it. They do it for fun. And so I got ready and I was able to shoot this picture right here. That's what I call the world's greatest dolphin photo. I don't mean that literally. I just mean it as a jab at a guest who had told me what he had told me the year before. But you can see Tokina 24 to 105 millimeter lens. I mean that dolphin was almost right on top of him. Set at 24 millimeters, 1/800th of a second at f11 because I didn't know exactly where the dolphin was going to jump and I needed to get some depth of field. ISO 800, and I overexposed it just a little bit to not blow out the sky, but to try to get as much detail in the dolphin's eye as I could, so I could brag to my friend from Houston, Texas, that I can get a picture of a dolphin's eye. So if you haven't got them yet, this is kind of closing up on this one. I'll go to the chat in a minute and open it up if anybody has any questions. Stay in touch, Russell at russellgraves.com or reach out at hackberryfarm.com. If you haven't got the free nature photography cheat sheets, go ahead. There's the QR code for that. You can get those as well. Those have been downloaded thousands of times, and as far as I know, it's providing a great value to the people who ever choose to use it. I'm just glad to give those out for free and glad people take the time to download them. And with that said, I'm going to say thanks. I'm going to quit. Oh, that's another predictive behavior. Quail came in, Redlands Ranch. They started dusting off, and I told everybody be ready because when they dust off, they always shake off. And we got lucky, and this one was facing us, and we all got that picture. And that's so exciting when you're able to do that and a plan comes together.